Welcome to my YouTube channel. I will start then. So basically why I'm presenting this, so to get to know how Sentry helps and what exactly it's doing, and also how Sentry can help us to write better software to debug our applications and to see how we can find the exception, how can we tackle them. So basically the title of this presentation is going to be like how Sentry can help us to create best and fast software. So this is going to be overview of my current presentation. So first I'm going to talk about exceptions in general. What are the exceptions? I'm going to explain a little bit about it. Then I will try to create talk about one real life example and see try to summarize for also non-technical people, so they can understand really well what the exceptions are and how they can impact the application. And then I will quickly give an overview how we debug the exception in the production. And then after that I'm going to introduce Sentry and then one quick example of it. So basically whenever we have a bug or let's say an exception in our application, the first reaction of any software developer or a programmer will be like, what the? So they aren't great, but we can write our good code, to find the exception and tackle them, like to detect them. So in general, what are the exceptions? So it can be defined as an event which occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts the normal flow of the program's instruction. So basically it can be defined as in a simpler way like an event which can mess with the execution of our program. So let's say we write a program of calculating a plus b, so like two numbers, but something goes wrong and it doesn't do addition, then these can be called as a exceptions. So it can be anything. Sometimes we can summarize it, sometimes they are not well defined, sometimes it's hard to interpret them. So it's sometimes they are not in our control as well. So let's say I have one example. We thought about having a coffee. We are sitting on a chair and we just have an idea of making a coffee. So can anybody think what will be the exception in this case?
The coffee machine breaks.
Yeah.
The proportions for the coffee are not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
There's water in the coffee, not coffee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The cup breaks.
So these are already some of them, So let's say we are sitting on a chair and we are having a thought of making a coffee, but then in like at the same time we change our thought to not to make a coffee, and we can define it as change of thought exception. So in the end we are not going to make a coffee at all. And then let's say we have already a thought we want to make a coffee, but then we were trying to stand up from a chair and our leg gets broken while standing up. It can be defined as kind of exception. Let's say resource failure exception. It can happen, these are not in our control, but it can happen in. So I'm trying to summarize it like with this example. So these exception are not in our control, but we want to make a coffee, but these things can happen, like these are unpredictable. One thing can also happen that the pathway that we are walking breaks in the middle while going to the kitchen. It can happen. So resource failure exception we can define as resource failure exception. Also we are interpreted by our friend in the middle. So we were running to the kitchen and then somebody stopped us saying, "Hey, I want to talk to you." And then our process of making a coffee get interrupted. So we can define it as a process interrupted exception. Also, let's say there is nothing but a long queue near the coffee machine. We want to make a coffee, but there are already 5 to 10 people in the queue for making a coffee. Then our process of making a coffee get halted. We have to wait for a bit to wait for our turn to make a coffee, and it can be defined as process halted exception. These are like just an overview. It's not like a programmatic world, but if somebody wants to write a application to make a coffee, then this can be an examples, good examples. And we are in the kitchen, we want to make a coffee, but we didn't find any clean cup or glass. So we have everything, but now resources are not available to make a coffee. So what we do, we just wait for it, we have to terminate our process, or we just need to find a clean glasses to tackle this situation. Also, like as Stefan said already, coffee machine gets broken or loss of electricity. It can be defined as fatal error exception. So basically, these all exceptions are not in our control. Maybe there are other more which we cannot define it, but these all are unpredictable. Some of them are predictable, and some of them are not in our control. So we want to make sure that whenever we write a code or write a application, we want to control the situation, like somehow figure out if something goes wrong, we want to handle them, so our application work like as we wanted to. So normal behavior should never be interrupted. So in programming phenomenon, the occurrence of an exception is unknown. So sometimes it's really hard just to figure out an exception. So maybe let's say we have another program of writing a calculator we build a application to do the mathematical operations, but user may write a string or let's say name, and then he wants to try addition with one number. Then if these exceptions are not handled well, then our calculator will crash. So this can happen. So but nowadays most of these frameworks, these languages, they all provide the logging system. So what basically the logging means, so let's say we want to build a calculator, the same example I want to talk about. Let's say we built a calculator in JavaScript. So that JavaScript language itself provides an internal mechanism to, so we implement that, and we implement a logging system. So if something goes wrong in our code while execution, it can report that thing to somewhere in our application or in our internal system. So we can basically log them and find out what went wrong and what user did at that moment to find exactly the reason behind that error. So that is what the logging means. But this logging is an internal part of these programming languages or the framework. So it's not like exposed to the end user. These loggings are not exposed to the end user. So they are internal behavior of these frameworks, the languages. So if we want to figure out what went wrong during that time, we have to read the logs and we have to interpret by our own to see what kind of error it was. So now let's assume we are already running our application in production mode. So how we debug? It can be anything. Let's assume we have React application or Node.js application or WordPress application. Any of these application, it can be a simple program, and these one or many app, we run it on production mode. Let's say we are in Kubernetes already, and we are running. How we debug, like maybe some of you know already how we debug it in a normal mode. Can anybody tell me about that?
Crashing the application in production.
Yeah, it can happen by crashing it, yes. Anyone else? Let's say these already already something happened, weird happened, and we are not having the behavior that we have expected it. Something went wrong, and now we want to see like what went wrong at that moment. How could we tackle that situation in the production, like during that time, or maybe just to find the reason behind it.
Debugging and
Just
finding out which. Hmm?
test it on stage.
But these something may happen that on stage we don't have a huge amount of traffic, let's say, or not real time users there. In production we are dealing with real time users. Let's say we build the same calculator, javascript calculator, we are running in production, and now users are typing some nonsense there, and we found that something was logged there, and now our application is crashing and it's not available for end user anymore. So these can happen. The thing is, like, if our application crashes, maybe sometime it goes in a loop just because it is unable to execute that operation, and the resources are still available, so they keep trying to execute the last operation, and during that process our system get in a loop mode, or like in a processing mode, so it is unable to execute the next instruction basically. So some operation, or like some, let's define it as a some input which halts the current process, and then it disables the execution for the next instruction. So the production get goes busy during that operation. It tries to solve it again and again. It goes in loop, and we are stuck there because our application is not getting out of it, because it just keeps waiting until it wants to finalize its instruction. So in this situation, our application already, if these good frameworks are already implemented, our application are already logged that reason, but also it will go on to execute again and again. So we have to log in inside this, so it will break the UI behavior of our application if something goes wrong. So we have to go inside that container, or like to our production, and we have to read logs by ourselves to see like what went wrong and why application is not behaving the way we want. So generally in term, we can say like ssh into the container and see the internal logging, like what went wrong, why application is in halt mode, why nothing gets executed. So these are the normal procedure when something goes wrong. But does it make sense to do it often again and again? It's completely fine if we have only one exception, but what if it just continue, to have an exception and our application keep crashing? So it's not a good practice to log in inside the container every time and read these logs by ourselves, because it it may happen that we don't have a proper access to log inside the container, and sometimes this process to just to do sss takes some time. Also we have to read the logs, and it's like very huge log can be to read those huge logs can be cumbersome, and people may find it like bit tiring, and it's messy just to read it for human. So here Sentry can help to interpret this log. And so Sentry, basically what it's going to do, so Sentry is a tool. We can put it on top of our application, so like it is isolated part, but Sentry will read the logs from our application. So application will behave the same way that it was exactly behaving before, but let's say our application logs some exception. This exception will be read by the Sentry. So Sentry has the log reading mechanism. So Sentry will read it and point it out to us that hey, something went wrong to your application. It can send us a notification, it can send us emails, it can send us, like, if you want to implement a notification on your mobile, you can implement it too. So these kind of alert mechanism is there. So if something critical happened, we get to know at the same point and same moment. So we will not even get delayed by our application exception. So let's say it happened today, now at 12 p.m. So we get the alert at the same time. But if Sentry is not there, so something went wrong and we may have not realized it. Somebody report to us and we get to know that hey, your application is crashing. So we want to avoid this, time gap, and we want to handle the situation before somebody tell us that hey, your application is crashing. So in this situation, Sentry is a really cool tool because we can figure out these things by our own. The user will keep on working, our application will go on running. If something goes wrong, it will create a log and then it will report it to the Sentry, and we can identify and we try to implement the solution by ourselves to make our application stable again. So right now Sentry supports these languages. So basically most of them are already used by all of the good companies and good software applications. These all are very well known programming languages. It can it can be integrated with Node.js, JavaScript, PHP, Python, also some of the frameworks. These are very well known frameworks used to create website application or software applications. It can be easily integrated with these framework. Example how we can integrate Sentry and make a use of it. So I'm going to their own website. They have a very well written documentation. Let's say if we want to integrate Sentry with PHP, so they already specify all the instructions here. So we create one project, we initialize composer, and then we install this library. Once we install this, once we have a Sentry running, we will have a DSN URL. This is specific to each project, and once we initialize it, we can put our code in try catch block, and whatever exception will occur here will be handled by the Sentry, and we can see the logs in there. Thank you guys for watching my video. I hope you like it. I try to make it simple as much as I can. Stay tuned till my next video. Thank you all for watching.